Welcome to the intro for this React stream. We're going to be watching some videos today. Most of these come from my React channel on Discord. And yeah, true crime, some not true crime. Depends on which one you clicked on. If you're watching this on YouTube, it means you missed the Twitch stream. That's okay. You can follow the Twitch and get to the next one. Or if you're following and watching on Twitch right now, you should be able to go sub to the YouTube channel right now. Let's do it. Let's watch a Brew video called The Man Who Killed Halloween. Very cool. We like Brew. I'm curious.
After returning home from a night out trick-or-treating.
This video is not AI generated. It was fully made by real people. God, how fucking epic.
8-year-old Timothy O'Brien was killed.
How epic of him to make
it,
sure that that's stated and known.
But they did know how. Through one seemingly innocent piece of candy.
Why are we quiet?
That Halloween, the entire community was gripped by terror.
Bro, is this the razor
Parents
blade
were convinced
incident?
that the legend had come true. A madman was poisoning candy, and any of their children could be next. Unfortunately, they were right. For months, someone had been planning the perfect crime through exploiting one of America's deepest fears. Detectives would have to race against time to find the other children who received the killer's candy before it was too late. This is the true story behind the Candyman, the legend that has fueled the Halloween Candyman for decades. But it's not the tale you think it is. The detectives arrived at the hospital that night to interview Timothy's father, Ronald Clark O'Brien, and obtain his account of what happened. Given Halloween's most famous tradition, their top priority was identifying and preventing any more children from falling victim to the same fate. Ronald was an optician and a highly respected church deacon.
Unfortunately, might be
a volunteer
too late at that
to help
point.
the local pastor in organizing community events. To the locals, he was a pillar of the community, singing in the choir and running the church bus program. Everyone was devastated to hear about his loss. He had taken his son and daughter trick-or-treating to the neighboring city of Pasadena, only a few minutes' drive, to join his friend Jim Bates and his 2 children. But because of the ongoing rain, they decided to stick to only 2 streets in Jim's neighborhood, Dunrail and Citation Street. After hitting a streak of houses handing out plenty of candy, the group arrived at a home with no lights on. They knocked anyway and waited for an answer. As the rain worsened, the children grew impatient and ran ahead to the next house. But Ronald stayed behind, waiting to see if anyone would answer the door. Someone finally did. The lights in the house never turned on, but the door opened a crack, just enough for a hairy man's arm to reach through and hand Ronald 5 giant pixie sticks for the children. Then, the door was closed without a word. Ronald told detectives he had no idea who the man was. He never heard his voice or saw anything but that arm. Ronald caught up with the children to hand out the candy, 1 pixie stick to each of his 2 children, and 2 to his neighbor's children. On the way home, he gave the 5th pixie stick to a 10-year-old boy he recognized from his church. That was the end of the trick-or-treating for the night. When they returned to their home in Deer Park, Timothy asked if he could eat some candy before bed. His parents both agreed, allowing him to choose just 1. Timothy chose the pixie stick, the biggest of the candy they had collected that night. But Timothy struggled to get the sweet, colorful powder out of the tube. The packet was closed by a staple, and Timothy's fingers were too small to open it. So Ronald stepped in to help. Once the first drops of powder hit his tongue, Timothy had an instant reaction. The powder was bitter and unpleasant, not the taste of pure sugar he had expected. He didn't want to eat any more of it, and complained about how gross it was to his dad, who gave him some Kool-Aid to wash the taste away. But unfortunately, no amount of Kool-Aid was going to wash away what was now inside his stomach. Timothy began to experience abdominal pain that grew stronger with every passing minute. As the seriousness of the situation became more evident, his father realized there must be something wrong with that candy, and remembered he had given one of those to his daughter, and rushed to check on her. He was relieved to find that she hadn't eaten the pixie stick yet. Shortly after his father had left the bedroom, Timothy jumped up and rushed to the bathroom.
That little?
As Ronald recounted the timeline of that evening's tragic events, he sobbed.
I mean, guys, like, drugs are powerful, dude. I mean, there's a reason cops have to have like fentanyl preventative stuff like on their person and in their car, because like the microgram of fentanyl can OD somebody. Microgram. Like not a gram, a microgram. Like literally smaller than you can conceptualize, really.
30 seconds after I left Tim's room, I heard him cry to me, "Daddy, Daddy, my stomach hurts." He was in the bathroom, convulsing, vomiting, and gasping, and then suddenly, he went limp. Timothy's parents called 911 and rushed their 8-year-old son to the hospital. Sadly, Timothy tragically died en route, less than an hour after he first tasted the pixie stick. The news quickly got around the local community, with neighbors and churchgoers reaching out to offer condolences, but they were also caught up in their own concerns. For decades, parents and their children had been warned about poisoned trick-or-treat candy, and now it had happened to one of their own. Stories of the poisoned candy had existed in American society for a long time. Before the Industrial Revolution, families would produce their own candy using recipes handed down through the generations, but by the 1890s, food production was moving out of the home and into factories far away. Strangers were adding unknown ingredients, using strange new chemicals, giving birth to an entirely new paranoia, amplified by doctors publicly claiming that they were treating children poisoned by candy every single day. A famous incident occurred in 1959. Dr. William Shine, a professional dentist, distributed 450 candy-coated laxative pills to children on Halloween, giving some 30 tablets instead of the typical adult dose of 2. At least 30 children fell ill with violent stomach problems. Luckily, none of them died or needed emergency treatment. Still, Dr. Shine was arrested quickly, having his dental license revoked, well, temporarily. Just 2 years later, he was back to treating patients. Although the repercussions he faced were short-term, his actions birthed the modern candy tampering legend that would grow for many years to come. In 1964, Helen Feel, a 47-year-old New York housewife, had special packages for teenagers she considered to be too old for trick-or-treating. When the children took their packages home, they eagerly unwrapped them to discover that they contained arsenic-laced ant baits, steel wool scrubbing pads, and dog biscuits. Nobody died, but it still added fuel to the nationwide anxiety. Throughout the rest of the 60s, more stories began to circulate, coming out of Canada, New Jersey, and Virginia, all of them sharing a new danger: razor blades. In 1967 alone, there were at least 9 cases reported across North America, each one displaying the same pattern: candy with razor blades neatly inserted inside candies, especially apples. Every Halloween, families across America would recount these stories to their children, warning them about the dangers of trick-or-treating. But for Jim Bates, Ronald's friend who had gone trick-or-treating with Timothy and his family, the warning was suddenly very, very real. Jim had gone to work after the All Hallows Eve walk around the neighborhood, but had his night shift cut short by a call from his wife. Timothy was dead, and their daughter was also feeling increasingly unwell. Jim raced home at 115 miles an hour, believing that their candy had been spiked. But when he got home, he discovered both his children hadn't eaten the pixie sticks. His wife had just cleaned the house, and if any of the powder fell on the carpet, she didn't want to take out the vacuum a second time. So she placed them on the counter, and they were still there when he arrived home. Had his daughter eaten other poisoned candy and gotten ill? Luckily, no. Turns out, she only had an unrelated headache and was fine. Meanwhile, panic spread across Deer Park in Pasadena. Thousands of parents brought their children's entire trick-or-treat hauls to police stations, fearing it might be laced with poison. Their children were devastated, but the stories of razor blades and arsenic were too familiar to ignore. Meanwhile, the Pasadena Police Department had no leads or suspects. The only logical conclusion, although speculative, was that one of the locals in the community had intentionally given out poisoned candy to kill as many children as possible. But who and why remained a complete mystery. The police forwarded the information to a Harris County prosecutor looking to start an official investigation into the death of 8-year-old Timothy. Next, the prosecutor called the chief medical examiner, explaining the situation as he understood it. A young boy had tragically lost his life after eating some candy. The examiner had only one question: What did his breath smell like? At first, this may have seemed like a strange question, but the morgue had already identified an unusual, distinct, and hard-to-ignore scent emanating from Timothy's remains. Almond. That tiny piece of information was all the chief medical examiner needed. Timothy had been poisoned with cyanide. Timothy's autopsy later confirmed that he had indeed been poisoned with cyanide, but it also revealed how extensive the poisoning had been. Timothy had consumed enough cyanide to kill 2 fully grown adults.
What? Yeah,
Whoever had
cyanide
spiked
has
the
a
candy
distinct
had
almond
only one
smell.
intended outcome in mind: death. This was terrible news for the authorities.
Weird.
Because if Timothy's pixie stick had been spiked, then, logically, the other 4 sticks were also full of poison. But currently, the investigators didn't have those sticks, and even worse, there was no telling how many other trick-or-treaters that night had been given the same cyanide-laced sticks. All they knew is that at any moment, another child might die. With the lives of an entire neighborhood of children at stake, the officers rushed from door to door throughout the neighborhood, asking every local resident if they had received or handed out pixie sticks to trick-or-treaters. The answer to both questions was a clear no from every single person on those 2 streets.
Duh.
Of course, there was no way of knowing whether anybody
Why would
was
somebody
telling
be
the
like,
truth.
yeah, I did?
However, they did at least recover 4 of the known sticks from the homes of Timothy and his neighbor. The 5th was still unaccounted for. Ronald recalled handing it to the boy from their church. When investigators entered the boy's home, they were overcome with a strange mix of horror and relief. The boy asleep in his bed, clutching the unopened pixie stick tube. Like Timothy, he had tried to open the candy, but his small fingers couldn't remove the staples keeping it tightly closed. This failure saved his life. All 5 of the pixie sticks tubes looked identical. The top, originally heat-sealed by the manufacturer, had been carefully cut open, and the first 2 inches of sugar poured out and replaced with granules of potassium cyanide, before being resealed with staples. Every tube contained unimaginable quantities of cyanide. Timothy's dose, which was enough to kill 2 adult humans, was the weakest of all 5. The other 4 contained enough to kill 3 to 4 adults each. With the cause of death confirmed, authorities now had to zero in on which house gave out the candy. Every person in the neighborhood insisted they had not given out or received any pixie sticks. Only one person had met the man who handed out the candy: Timothy's father, Ronald. The officers requested his help, bringing him with them to canvass the neighborhood and identify the culprit's home. They would retrace the group's steps exactly as it happened, going from house to house, giving them a full reenactment of that night. In the days following the death of his son, the community had rallied around Ronald and the rest of the family as they planned and held the funeral for their beloved child. Detectives knew that the stress of the situation would make it hard for Ronald to focus, and retracing the steps like this could trigger an emotional response. But when they got out on the streets with him, they were surprised by how confused he was. Ronald couldn't remember which house he got the sticks from, even though they had only visited 2 streets in the neighborhood within a short space of time. His memory was failing him when it mattered most. After walking the entire neighborhood, the investigators had nothing to go on. They decided the best solution was to cut the search short, give Ronald some time, and start again a few days later. But on their second trip, his memory was no better and produced the same result: nothing. On the third walk, the police, now frustrated, started being firm with him, stressing the importance of sharing anything he could remember. Children's lives were at stake. If he couldn't remember anything at all, the killer might walk, free to strike again in some other sinister way. Ronald went through his mind one more time, recalling the story he had told investigators earlier about the house with the lights out, and the man's hairy arm that handed him the pixie sticks. Suddenly, it all came flooding back. Ronald pointed to the exact house. Authorities knocked at the door, and just like on Halloween night, there was no answer. But this time, no matter how long they waited, or how many times they knocked, the door never opened. Within an hour, they had a complete record of the homeowner, Courtney Melvin, identifying him as an air traffic controller at the William P. Hobby Airport. He was married with a daughter. This was their one and only suspect. A group of police officers raced to the airport, tracking the man down during his work shift. In front of his coworkers and friends, the authorities announced that he was under arrest on suspicion of murdering a child and attempting to murder multiple others. They finally had their guy. The suspect, however, said otherwise. According to him, they had got it all wrong. Courtney Melvin denied any involvement in the incident, insisting that he wasn't even home on the night Timothy died. He was at work, not arriving home until after 11 p.m. He didn't hand out a single piece of candy to anybody. The only people in his home on Halloween night were his wife and daughter, neither of whom had the hairy man's arm the police were now leaning on as evidence. This did not come as a surprise to the detectives. Denial is a typical response to being accused of a crime as extreme as murder. Could he be covering something up, or did they have the wrong person? The first step was to check out his alibi. The suspect's wife and daughter corroborated his story. The two of them had been home all night, but had turned the lights out and went to bed early after running out of candy for the trick-or-treaters. Neither of them apparently had any recollection of handing out pixie sticks, and none were found in their home. Of course, that didn't mean Mr. Melvin was innocent. He could easily have dumped any remaining sticks and orchestrated this whole cover story with his family.
It's not like they're just going to be like, well, yep, it was me.
Their next stop would be the airport where they had publicly arrested him in front of his colleagues. Detectives interviewed over 200 of the suspect's co-workers, with every single one testifying that he had been at work the whole night, as he had claimed. His timesheets further validated this narrative. With that, all suspicions of this man vanished. He physically could not have handed out poisoned candy in the neighborhood. The detectives had to accept that their one and only suspect was a totally innocent man, for now, and one they had publicly humiliated. It seemed to them that they were right back to square one, asking the same questions. Who in the neighborhood could be poisoning these children? And why? It had been days since Timothy's death. His family had buried him. The community had grieved, but investigators were no closer to understanding who could have done this. They had nothing else to go on but Ronald's recollection of the incident. They had already gone door to door, asking neighbors if they had received or given out any pixie sticks. Not a single house said yes. If they were telling the truth, how did 5 of them get into the hands of Ronald? Unless, what if Ronald had the pixie sticks on him the entire time and lied about everything?
Uh-oh.
Investigators had been suspicious about parts of his story, but they didn't consider him as a suspect. He had a lot of goodwill in the neighborhood. His generosity and kindness were well known. It was simply unthinkable that this man could do something as evil as this, especially to his own children. But his unusual memory gaps and inconsistencies were concerning, and the lack of any other witnesses or evidence made investigators feel as if there was no other better target for their focus. A background check revealed that Timothy's father was not, in fact, the stable family man he presented himself as. He had spent the last decade struggling to hold a job for longer than a year, jumping between 21 different workplaces. And unfortunately, his latest gig at Texas State Optical was heading in the same direction. Apparently, he was about to be fired from the role due to suspected theft. That detail led to the next question. What would compel a devoted churchgoer to steal from his workplace? His financial records exposed him as a chronic overspender, living well outside of his means. And now, he was having to face the consequences. His car was about to be repossessed. He had defaulted on several bank loans, and the family home was under foreclosure. His lifestyle had ballooned his debts to over $100,000. In 2025 money, that's over $640,000. So there was a clear and credible motive for his workplace theft, but this wasn't an adequate motive to drive a father who was, albeit bad with money but otherwise completely normal, to kill his own flesh and blood. At least, that's how it seemed at first. Investigators followed the money to January 1974.
Surely he
10
didn't have a
months
life
before
insurance
Timothy's
policy
tragic
on
death.
his kids.
His father had taken out $10,000 life insurance policies on both of his children. If the two of them died under unfortunate, tragic circumstances, he would legally be able to claim $20,000. But that wouldn't be enough to cover his over $100,000 debt. So for perhaps this reason, 1 month before Timothy's death, Ronald took out an additional $20,000 policies on both children, despite documented objections from his insurance agency and Ronald's insistence that they not tell his wife, Deneen. But of course, in the tragic event of both of his children's simultaneous deaths, $60,000 would still leave him with over $40,000 in debt. So in the days leading up to Halloween, Ronald had secured yet another $20,000 policy for each child. By Halloween, he had covered around $60,000 per child. $120,000 total, nearly $800,000 in today's dollars. Now, there was a clear, obvious motive for the detectives. If both of his children died, Ronald could pay off his debt and still come home with $20,000, over $130,000 today, in profit. Of course,
That's
all of this
fucking
was
crazy,
speculative. It was simply a plausible motive. They needed evidence of intent. On the morning after Timothy's death, while his body still lay in the morgue, his father had called the insurance company to inquire about collecting the policies. That didn't confirm guilt, but it did show that the supposedly grieving father's first concern was money. But he could have simply needed the money as soon as possible to be able to make funeral arrangements. However, this was enough to secure a search warrant. On November 5th, 1974, 5 days after Timothy's death, officers arrived at the family home. They searched the entire place from top to bottom. The first item of interest detectives discovered was Ronald's pocket knife, which had traces of plastic and powdered candy still stuck to the blade. Was this perhaps evidence that he had cut open the pixie sticks to add the poison? Or was it just used to open the pixie stick for his son when he couldn't do it himself? Regardless, police felt this was enough for Ronald to be arrested and taken in for questioning right away. The community was stunned. This was now the second local man portrayed as an unthinkably evil monster. And not only was he one of the most beloved members of the community, the boy he may have killed was his own son. It was simply unbelievable. The case had become national headline news, with people all across America tuning in to learn more about the despicable man who had supposedly murdered his own son as part of an insurance fraud scheme.
That's crazy,
The media
bro.
dubbed Ronald the Candyman and crafted the narrative of a man who conned an entire community. He was never the generous, selfless man he painted himself as, but a money-hungry psychopath seeking a quick solution to his problems. This wasn't just another chapter in the old Halloween candy tampering legend. This was potentially one of the most heinous crimes imaginable: filicide. Ronald was indicted on 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder for the other children who had received poison pixie sticks but hadn't consumed them. He entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. But what was the truth? That would be up to the jury to decide.
I wonder.
Ronald's trial began on May 5th, 1975, in Houston. One witness to take the stand was a Pasadena police officer who worked the case. He described Ronald as a wolf in sheep's clothing. He was hiding behind religion and giving the impression that he was a pillar of the community.
Nobody
It was
does
all a
that.
sham, all a lie. His in-laws recalled the emotional day of the burial, how everyone in attendance was devastated by the loss of young Timothy. Everyone except his own father. Ronald spent the entire day talking about using the insurance money to take an extended vacation and buy other luxury items. That was something that his co-workers had also noticed. Continued bragging about how his poor financial situation was about to improve. Ronald's friend, Jim Bates,
My
who went trick-or-treating that
Lord.
night with Timothy and his family, also found the burial deeply disturbing.
Wow.
He was not upset. He was not despondent at all. When the girl started playing on the organ, he walked right beside that open casket with his kid in it. He didn't pause. He didn't look. He didn't stop. He walked right by. Right then, my brain clicked. I could feel it. I felt incredibly suspicious.
Dude.
A chemist told the court that 2 months before the murder, he was contacted by Ronald,
Unreal.
asking about cyanide and how much would be required to kill a human being. The chemist found the questions odd, but answered them, not realizing he was providing information for a potential murder plot. Another witness, who worked as a chemical supply salesman, recalled that Ronald had approached him with similar questions.
My
Only this time, he
Lord,
was
bro.
showing an interest in actually purchasing cyanide. By October 1974, records showed that he had physically visited a chemical supply store in Houston, asking to buy the smallest possible amount of cyanide. But when he discovered the minimum purchase was £5, he left empty-handed. Police were never able to determine if he had actually bought cyanide from another vendor. The source of the poison remained unknown. The prosecution methodically destroyed his
Crazy,
story
dude.
piece by piece. But then came the moment that sealed his fate. His wife, Deneen, testified for the prosecution. She admitted that she knew about the initial $10,000 policies her husband had taken out on her children. In fact, she had objected to them, but he had overruled her, insisting that it was the thing to do. However, she had no idea about the further insurance policies he had taken out on the children. After her initial objection, he had seemingly gone out of his way to avoid her ever finding out. In a devastating blow to his defense,
Wild.
she contradicted his account of that Halloween night in almost every single way.
Oh.
According to her, Timothy hadn't chosen the pixie stick from his candy collection at all. Instead, his father had pushed him to try the pixie stick, essentially forcing the boy to consume the poison that would kill him. By this point, nobody had a single doubt regarding his guilt. Ronald had killed his own son.
Dude.
His defense, as per his original plan, relied on America's persistent fear of deadly tampered treats. This pre-existing archetype, along with the goodwill he had established with the community, would allow the blame for his children's murder to quickly fall on some random, hypothetical madman, allowing Ronald to collect the insurance money while keeping him free of accusation. His plan also hinged on the killing of multiple children to maintain the illusion.
Crazy,
In his
bro.
mind, if nobody but his children died, it would look too targeted, too specific. But a group of unrelated children dying from the same candy would provide enough evidence of the so-called candy poisoner that nobody would suspect him. And, terrifyingly, he might have gotten away with it too, if it wasn't for his carelessness and greed. The legends that Ronald had hoped would provide cover instead highlighted the calculated
Just
nature
evil,
of his
bro.
crime.
I agree.
Despite those two stories about the dentist giving out candy-coated laxatives and the housewife who handed out ant baits, no documented cases of Halloween poisonings proved true. Sociologists like Joel Best have done extensive research into the urban legends and had never found any actual major incidents. In fact, almost all of the claims that have existed since the Industrial Revolution have been proven to be hoaxes and pranks, feeding on paranoia and social tensions, while only a select few led to injuries and may have been done by family members and in many cases the children themselves to garner attention. The only verified case of a madman killing children with Halloween candy was sitting in the defendant's chair, claiming innocence. The jury's deliberation was swift and decisive.
Oh, yeah, I
On June
wonder.
3rd, 1975, after only 46 minutes of discussion,
Bruh.
they returned a guilty verdict on all counts.
Shocker.
1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. The sentencing phase took 71 minutes longer. The same jury that had quickly convicted Ronald sentenced him to death by electrocution. In Texas in 1975, that meant a date with Old Sparky, the electric chair at the Huntsville unit. As the
Yo,
verdict was read,
zapped him.
Ronald showed no emotion. Shortly after his conviction, his wife filed for divorce, officially severing all ties with the man who had murdered their son.
Yeah, that's fair.
Ronald was immediately transferred to the Ellis 1 unit near Huntsville, Texas, where he joined many other condemned men on death row. According to the then chaplain for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, Ronald was shunned and despised by his fellow death row inmates for killing his child
Yeah.
and was absolutely friendless. The inmates
Yep.
reportedly petitioned prison officials to hold an organized demonstration on his execution date for no other reason than for them to express their hatred of him. Ronald's execution was scheduled and
Crazy.
postponed multiple times as his lawyers filed appeal after appeal. His first execution date was set for August 8, 1980, but was put on hold. A second date of May 25, 1982 was also postponed due to constitutional violations.
I mean, guys, like I said in the last video, like, prisoners hate nothing more than a pedophile. But that falls onto people who hurt children as well, ultimately. Anybody who victimizes kids, they're fucked. They hate them. Like, everybody hates a predator, dude.
Concerns. In a cruel irony, one judge scheduled a third execution date for Halloween 1982, exactly 8 years after Timothy's murder, and even offered to drive Ronald to the death chamber personally to ensure that justice was served. However, the Supreme Court also delayed this execution to give Ronald a chance to pursue an appeal seeking a new trial, though that also failed.
Ain't no way, bro.
Finally, a fourth date was set, March 31st, 1984. Ronald's lawyers made one last desperate attempt. Since lethal injection had recently been adopted in Texas, they argued that since he was sentenced to death by electric chair, the change constituted cruel and unusual punishment. However, lethal injection was seen as more humane and less prone to failures like with the electric chair. On March 28th, a federal judge denied the final stay of execution. On March 31st, 1984, shortly after midnight, he was brought in to be executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. He would be one of the first inmates executed in Texas using this method. Ronald's final statement consisted of nothing but self-pity and denial. With his dying breath, he maintained his innocence. He never confessed to murdering Timothy or attempting to kill the other children. He was pronounced dead at 12:48 a.m. Outside the prison, a crowd of nearly 300 demonstrators had gathered. Supporters of the death penalty cheered when witnesses emerged from the execution chamber. Some yelled "trick or treat," while others showered anti-death penalty protesters with candy in a macabre reference to Ronald's crime. The symbolism was unmistakable. The Candyman had finally paid for his Halloween horror. In the weeks
fucked up. I mean, yeah, but also that's not uncommon. There's a lot of execution. I don't know how else to describe it other than tailgating. It's like the only similar activity where people like wait for a thing to happen. Celebration, well, celebration maybe, but they're waiting for a specific thing that they know is going to happen. Like tailgating is like that, where they're waiting for the game to start, or they're hyped about the game. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I mean, Ted Bundy's was another really big execution Friday. Yeah, exactly. Like people outside, people sold shirts of Bundy. People like blasted music outside of his execution hall. Like there's a whole thing about Bundy's execution all over because of how crazy people went during that day. It's something else.
Before his death, Timothy's mother visited her ex-husband in prison, listening to him crying and insisting he was innocent. But she never believed him, successfully obtaining her divorce and later remarrying. Her new husband adopted Timothy's sister, giving her a fresh start and a new identity far from the horrors of what her biological father did. The insurance money, what Timothy's mother called blood money, was never claimed. But the ripples of Ronald's actions unfortunately can be felt far beyond his own family's trauma and loss.
Yeah.
His crime fundamentally changed Halloween in America forever, kickstarting modern Halloween candy inspection rituals. He made the legends and myths into a bleak reality. After Timothy's death, parents began methodically checking their children's Halloween hauls, looking for unmarked candy, signs of tampering, or anything else suspicious.
What a nervous wreck.
Hospitals offered free X-ray services for Halloween hauls. Police stations set up collection points for suspicious treats. Communities began organizing safe Halloween events in controlled environments like church halls and community centers. The spontaneous and carefree joy of trick-or-treating is now becoming more and more structured, contained, and overly cautious. The stories have continued in the decades after Ronald. Some unfortunate deaths were misattributed to Halloween candy, and there were no real recorded cases of candy tampering, except for one. In 2000, 49-year-old James Joseph Smith had inserted needles into Snicker bars and handed them out for Halloween. One child was pricked by the needle when he bit into it. After he was arrested, James was deemed too mentally ill to go to trial. Thankfully, his actions didn't lead to death or permanent injury. With this being the only Halloween candy tampering incident since Timothy's death over 50 years ago, it seems as though the paranoia over tainted trick-or-treat bags is unwarranted. Yet today, the Candyman's shadow still looms over parents like the boogeyman of Halloween. Candy inspections continue.
Nothing makes
some
somebody
families limit their
more
children
scared
to
than their
only
child's
knocking on
safety,
houses
though.
of people they know personally,
I mean,
all
I
to
know.
prevent their loved ones meeting the next Candyman. But we'd like to hear from you. As a trick-or-treater, parent, or one of the kind neighbors handing out candy, what is your experience? Is Halloween alive and well, or is it an undead version of what it used to be? The almighty YouTube algorithm is very unforgiving, and the only way we can afford to keep making videos is because our awesome viewers tell the algorithm that our video is worth watching. You can do this by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel, and sharing this video with a friend or loved one who you think might find this topic interesting.
The like
also,
button and
check out one of our
highlighted.
other videos, like this one, where we investigate the terrifying found footage of a man lost deep underground in the Paris catacombs.
It's so funny how YouTube can hear somebody say like and sub or whatever, and then the buttons like flash. It's like, oh, do it. Great videos always, dude. Bruce team does a great job with these videos, man. It's so hard for me to even. I don't even think I talked much during this one because I'm just like, It's so like they're so captivating. What can I say? W video. Fucked up man. Glad he fried.